I am Luke, 30 years old, living alone in a cramped studio on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. My life is quiet, maybe even boring. I work long shifts at a local auto repair shop, fixing cars from sunrise to sunset, and by the time I drag myself home, all I want is a shower and my old couch. Weekends are no different. Beer in one hand, football on a screen that's older than I am, and the kind of solitude most people might call lonely. But I call it freedom. No wife, no kids, not even anyone who stays around long enough to leave a mark. Life is simple, predictable, and I like it that way. That night, though, everything shifted in a heartbeat, as if the universe decided to punch a hole in my orderly little bubble. I unlocked my door, shoulders sore from a 12-hour shift. The lingering smell of grease stuck to my clothes. My apartment is nothing glamorous. A single living room that doubles as a kitchen, a bedroom barely big enough to swing a cat, and a few mismatched pieces of furniture I'd picked up from garage sales. Neon from a bar across the street spilled through my blinds, painting the floor in strange, jagged patterns. I dropped my bag with a thud, reached for a cold beer in the fridge, and just as I was about to sink into the couch, my phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number. Local area code, but I didn't recognize it. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the decline button. Usually it's just a telemarketer or a scammer. Maybe someone trying to collect on a debt I don't even owe. But something in the tone of the ring made my stomach tighten. I pressed the answer button. "This is Luke," I said cautiously. "Mr. Luke Parker?" A woman's voice replied, sharp and hurried. "This is a teacher from Evergreen Elementary. You need to come pick up your daughter immediately. Alice is waiting and we're about to close." I froze, beer halfway to my lips. "Daughter, Alice?" My mind screamed at me, confused and panicked. "Wait, what?" "You have the wrong person. I'm single." "I don't have a child," I said, voice shaking despite my attempt at calm. "No, sir," she said firmly. "Alice Parker's file clearly lists you as her father. Your number, your address. You need to come now. If you don't, this is considered child abandonment. The authorities will be called. She's only 4 years old." My knees felt weak. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I clutched the beer tighter, almost forgetting to breathe. Alice Parker. The name tugged at the edges of a memory I couldn't place, like a shadow brushing past my mind. But no, this had to be a mistake. A prank, a stolen identity. I hadn't even had a serious girlfriend since college. "I don't have a daughter." "I don't, sir? Are you there?" The teacher's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. "Yes, I'm here," I managed to say, voice trembling. "Listen, you have to check again. I don't have a child. There's no Alice Parker here." Her sigh carried both frustration and urgency. "Sir, we've checked. You're listed as the father. This isn't something we can ignore. You need to come now." I sank into the couch, the beer forgotten, heart hammering. My mind raced through every possibility, every mistake that could have led to this. Identity theft. Someone using my name? But even as the panic rose, a strange, almost imperceptible feeling whispered inside me, like I knew, somewhere deep down, that Alice Parker wasn't just a mistake. That somehow, somewhere, this little girl was connected to me in ways I couldn't yet understand. I grabbed my jacket, my keys, my wallet. There was no time to think. Somewhere in Portland, a 4-year-old girl was waiting for a father who, as far as I knew, didn't exist. And yet, with every step toward my car, the chilling thought gnawed at me. What if she really was mine? And I'd been blind to it all along. Before I continue, tell, from which place are you watching this story right now? Please subscribe and like the video for motivation. The drive to Evergreen Elementary felt unreal, like I'd slipped into someone else's life without permission. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached, but I couldn't stop thinking about the words the teacher had said. Alice Parker's file clearly lists you as her father. Me, Luke Parker, a daughter. 4 years old. My brain refused to accept it, tried to push the thought away like a virus I couldn't see. Yet the nagging pull, the tiny thread of something I couldn't quite place, made my stomach twist. How could I have a child? Who would have left me in the dark for 4 years? Questions swirled, suffocating, and the only thing I could do was drive. Drive and hope that answers, or at least some semblance of reason, awaited me at the school. Traffic crawled. The streets of Portland, usually familiar, now felt foreign, as if the city itself was conspiring to slow me down. I tried calling every number I could think of, my mother, Old friends, exes from college, but no one knew a thing. No one had even heard of Alice Parker. I felt my heartbeat in my throat, a panic clawing upward I couldn't control. My apartment suddenly seemed impossibly small, as though the walls themselves had closed in on me and spat me out into a world I wasn't ready for. By the time I reached Evergreen Elementary, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges. The schoolyard was empty except for a few custodians locking up and a lone teacher pacing near the entrance. My gut twisted further, a mixture of fear, anger, and an inexplicable longing I couldn't name. As I stepped out of my car, the chill of the evening air hit me, making the hairs on my arms stand up. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly unprepared. The teacher, a woman named Ms. Reynolds, approached quickly, her pace brisk but not unkind. "You're Luke Parker?" she asked, her eyes scanning mine for confirmation, though the statement carried the weight of someone trying to believe a miracle themselves. I nodded dumbly, unsure if I was terrified or relieved that someone was finally validating my nightmare. "Come with me," she said, leading me down a hallway lined with lockers and fading posters of smiling children. My ears rang with the echo of my own footsteps, the hollow sound amplifying the unease in my chest. And then I saw her. Alice. She was sitting alone in a small playroom, coloring books scattered around her like a tiny universe she had created for herself. Her hair fell in golden waves around her face, and her wide, curious eyes that were unmistakably mine, lifted toward me. The sight stole my breath. She froze the moment she saw me, pencil hovering midair. Recognition flashed across her face, a delicate mix of relief and confusion. "Daddy?" she whispered, voice small and trembling. I wanted to tell her I wasn't ready, that this must be a mistake, but the word hit me like a tidal wave. Daddy. She called me Daddy. And somehow, even though I'd never met her before, or had I, my memories were suddenly clouded, fragmented, like shards of a puzzle I couldn't yet assemble. Ms. Reynolds gave me a gentle look. "She's been waiting all day. I promised her I'd call you." Her words barely registered. My legs felt like they had turned to jelly. I wanted to run, to ask questions, to scream at the universe for putting me in this impossible scenario. But at the same time, I felt an invisible pull toward Alice, something primal, instinctive, as though she had been waiting for me long before. I even knew her name. Kneeling down to her level, I tried to steady my voice. "Hi, Alice," I said, my throat tight. She studied me with those piercing eyes, and then slowly, cautiously, she smiled. The kind of smile that disarms every doubt, every fear. "Daddy," she said again, this time with a bit more certainty. "Okay," I whispered to myself. "Okay." I reached out, hand trembling, and she leaned into my touch. My world shifted in that moment, the walls I had built around my lonely existence crumbling in an instant. 4 years of solitude, 4 years of ignorance, and suddenly the universe demanded. I confront a truth I wasn't ready for. Ms. Reynolds cleared her throat softly. "We need to get her home. We've tried calling emergency contacts, but no one else is listed." It was urgent. My mind reeled. Home. My home or hers? The concept of taking responsibility for someone, for a life that had been silently waiting for me, made me dizzy driving back. Alice strapped safely in the passenger seat. I tried to make sense of everything. Her small hand reached across the seat and grabbed mine. "You're really my daddy?" she asked. Her voice carried a mixture of hope and skepticism, the kind only a child who has been left in confusion could muster. I wanted to say yes, to hold her and promise the world, but the words caught in my throat. All I could do was nod, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt a weight, sweet, terrifying, unshakable, that made every past regret, every lonely night, every lost opportunity pale in comparison. When we pulled into my building, she pressed her face to the window, watching the streets go by. I wondered about her life before this moment. Who had she lived with? Where had she slept? Did she remember me at all? And most hauntingly, why had no one told me I existed as a father? My mind spun through every possibility, from abandonment to error to something darker, but none of it could explain the undeniable fact sitting next to me. This little girl, with my eyes and my laugh, belonged to me. We reached my apartment, and I felt the weight of reality hit me like a truck. The space that had once been my sanctuary now felt impossibly small, inadequate. How could I possibly take care of her here, How could I suddenly become responsible for a life that I didn't even know existed until a few hours ago? But as I opened the door and watched her tiny feet padding across the worn wooden floor, I realized something else. It didn't matter. Somehow, some way, I would figure it out. I had no choice. That night, I watched her sleep in the small fold-out bed I had shoved into the corner of the living room, her small chest rising and falling, her fingers curling in dreams I could not know. And as I sat in the darkness, staring at the neon light cutting across my floor, a storm of emotions tore through me. Fear, love, guilt, and hope all tangled together. Questions I didn't even know to ask loomed in the shadows, waiting for the light of morning. How had this happened? Who had left her in this situation? And most terrifyingly, why now? Sleep eluded me. Every creak of the apartment, every distant horn outside, every soft sigh from the corner where she slept kept me awake. Memories I didn't even realize I had began to surface in fragments. A name I might have whispered in the past, a place I might have been, a fleeting encounter that suddenly felt like it belonged to a story I hadn't remembered living. I was haunted by the idea that I had missed 4 entire years of her life. Years I could never get back. By sunrise, I knew I had to act. I had to understand. I had to find answers. The world outside might have been normal, calm, indifferent, but my universe had shifted irrevocably. I was no longer just Luke, a man content with solitude. I was Luke, a father, perhaps a father who had been blind, perhaps a father who had been lied to, perhaps a father who had somehow survived without knowing he had a daughter. But most importantly, I was her father now. And nothing, not fear, not confusion, not time itself, could change that. I opened my laptop and began searching for anything, records, news, anything that could explain why Alice had appeared in my life like a ghost from a past I didn't remember. Names, addresses, court filings, old emails, pictures. Everything became a thread I had to pull. And as I dove deeper, I discovered a series of emails between people I hadn't seen in years, conversations I had no memory of, and photographs of a little girl who looked exactly like I had imagined. Except that I had never imagined her before. Each discovery made the reality more terrifying. There were hints of a past relationship I had forgotten entirely, of a night that ended in confusion and disappearance, of choices I had thought I'd never made. And yet, despite the fear, despite the growing chaos, there was one unshakable truth: she was mine. And she needed me now more than ever. By the time the sun rose fully over Portland, Luke Parker, who had spent 30 years living quietly and alone, realized that his life had ended the moment he picked up that phone. What awaited him now was a labyrinth of secrets, lies, and mysteries, and only one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. And for the first time, fear mingled with something sweeter, something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Morning. Light spilled through the blinds, casting streaks across my cluttered apartment. But it brought no clarity. Instead, it magnified the chaos that had erupted in my life overnight. Alice stirred beside me, stretching and yawning as if nothing extraordinary had happened, her golden hair catching the sunlight. Her eyes met mine, full of trust and curiosity, and my heart ached and tightened all at once. I had barely known her for 24 hours, but already I felt a responsibility so heavy it threatened to crush me. How had I missed 4 entire years of her life? Who had hidden her existence from me? The questions refused to stop, looping endlessly in my mind as I sipped the cold coffee I had abandoned. Hours ago, I realized immediately that I needed answers. If Alice truly belonged to me, someone had deliberately kept us apart, and I couldn't let that continue. I pulled up my laptop, determined to trace every lead I could find. I started with the school records Ms. Reynolds had mentioned, but surprisingly, the system required an official parent login to access detailed files. I wasn't listed as a guardian anywhere in the digital system, yet the paper file Ms. Reynolds had referred to clearly listed me as Alice Parker's father, with my phone number and my address. The contradictions gnawed at me. Was this some clerical error, or had someone gone to extreme lengths to fabricate a connection that couldn't exist? I dug deeper, checking old emails, online forums, and social media, scanning for any mention of Alice Parker. Nothing concrete surfaced. Only vague coincidences: a photograph of a blonde girl at a park 4 years ago that had been posted publicly, a vague comment about a child's birthday. But the faces in these images didn't fully match. Still, something tugged at my memory. Faint threads of moments I couldn't quite place. A mother's voice? A visit to a playground? A fleeting sense of laughter echoing through a corridor I hadn't been in for years? I shook my head, frustrated. My life had been ordinary, uneventful, and now every shadow seemed pregnant with secrets. I had never imagined I decided to confront Ms. Reynolds again. Perhaps she knew more than she had revealed. I drove back to Evergreen Elementary, the streets now crowded with the usual morning rush of parents and school buses. Alice sat quietly in the passenger seat, clutching a small stuffed rabbit I had bought at a convenience store the previous night. She asked questions intermittently, innocent and unfiltered. "Daddy, where's Mommy?" she whispered at one point, her voice trembling. My heart skipped a beat. I had no memory of her mother, no clue of who had raised her before this moment. How could I possibly explain the unexplainable to a 4-year-old? Ms. Reynolds met me in the lobby, her face lined with worry and exhaustion. "Luke, I think it's time you understood the full story," she said quietly, gesturing toward an empty office. I followed her inside, my pulse hammering in my ears. She closed the door and exhaled. "Alice's situation isn't straightforward. She's been in foster care for much of her life. And the woman who signed the adoption papers, well, that's complicated. We believed you were her father because of the information we were given, but I suspect someone falsified records. We didn't know until... You called that you had no prior involvement. Falsified records?" I echoed, disbelief mingling with growing dread. "Who would do that, and why? This isn't just a mistake, it's someone's choice to hide a child from me." My hands trembled, gripping the edge of her desk. Ms. Reynolds leaned back, her expression grim. "I don't know, Luke, but there's more. Alice's mother, or at least the woman we thought was her mother, died shortly after childbirth. The child was placed in the system, but somewhere along the way the records were altered. Some official documents list you as the father, others don't. Whoever did this wanted to create ambiguity, to make it nearly impossible for anyone to track your connection." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. Why would anyone... My voice broke. My mind swirled with images of a little girl waiting alone, while I wandered through life oblivious to her existence. 4 years. 4 years without a father she never knew she had. I couldn't even fathom the guilt, the rage, the sheer heartbreak I felt on her behalf. Ms. Reynolds stood and handed me a folder. "We found some letters in the archives, handwritten. Correspondence between social workers and what appears to be someone trying to orchestrate your absence. You need to read these carefully. They might provide the answers you seek." Back in my apartment, Alice playing quietly in the corner with her stuffed rabbit, I opened the folder. The letters were strange, meticulously detailed, written in a style both formal and chillingly deliberate. Someone had gone to extreme lengths to separate me from my child, crafting stories, forging signatures, and manipulating official channels. As I read, I began to recognize fragments, memories I had buried, nights I had spent drinking alone, blurred faces in passing crowds, fleeting encounters with a woman I could no longer name. A sudden realization dawned. This was not random. This was targeted. Someone knew me well enough to manipulate my life, to erase my involvement from history, fear mixed with anger. I had always been cautious, careful, living my quiet, solitary life, and yet someone had intruded upon it so thoroughly that I had missed the most fundamental part of my existence, a daughter. And now she was here, waiting for me to claim her, waiting for me to fight for her. I couldn't imagine letting her go, not now, not ever. Determined to find the truth, I reached out to the only person I could think of who might help, my father's old friend, Martin, a retired lawyer who had always been a stabilizing presence in my life. Martin had a knack for uncovering hidden truths, for seeing the connections that others missed. If anyone could navigate the legal labyrinth and uncover the forgeries, it was him. The moment I explained the situation over the phone, his voice grew serious. "Luke, this is bigger than a simple clerical error. Someone went to extraordinary lengths. You need to document everything. Preserve every letter, every email, every record. I'll help you trace the legal chain and uncover who orchestrated this. But be prepared. It's going to be messy. And dangerous, dangerous." The word clung to me like a shadow as I hung up. Who would go to such lengths to manipulate my life? Why hide a child from her father? And most importantly, how far would they go if I started asking questions? Over the next few days, I dove into a relentless investigation, fueled by a combination of fear, love, and an unshakable need to protect Alice. I tracked phone records, scoured property documents, and began cross-referencing everything I could find with the letters from Ms. Reynolds. It quickly became clear that someone with access to the system, someone cunning, patient, and meticulous, had created a web of deception meant to obscure the truth. Alice, despite her young age, sensed the tension. She clung to me more than ever, eyes wide with curiosity and concern.
"Daddy, are we going to find Mommy?"
she asked one afternoon, her small hand resting on mine. I swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. We're going to try, Alice," I said carefully. "We're going to find out the truth. And no matter what, I promise, I'll always be here for you." Her small hand squeezed mine, a gesture of trust that both bolstered me and broke me at the same time. I realized that protecting her, uncovering the truth, and reclaiming our lives wasn't just a choice, it was a responsibility I had no right to ignore. The deeper I dug, the more disturbing the revelations became. There were gaps in birth records, unexplained disappearances of social workers involved in the early years of Alice's life, and cryptic references to court cases that had been mysteriously sealed. It was as if someone had created a shadow existence for her, a parallel life designed to isolate her from me, to erase me completely. And then I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Photographs hidden in an old email archive of a woman who could only be Alice's mother. She was beautiful, kind-eyed, smiling at a baby I could only assume was Alice. But in every photograph, there was a subtle, almost imperceptible tension, a sense of fear and urgency. Notes alongside the images hinted at threats, at pressures from people who had wanted to control the child's fate. Someone had orchestrated her life like a puppet, keeping strings hidden from everyone, including me. I realized that the mystery wasn't just about hidden parentage. It was about control, about power over a child's destiny, and about a past I had no memory of that someone else had manipulated for their own purposes. Whoever had done this knew me, knew my routines, my weaknesses, and my capacity to ignore subtle warnings. And now, years later, their choices had finally collided with reality. I had found Alice. I was here. And they would not be able to control her any longer. That night, as Alice slept, I sat surrounded by papers, emails, photographs, and letters, piecing together the puzzle of a life that had been deliberately hidden from me. The realization settled like stone in my chest. The road ahead would be dangerous, and answers would not come easily. But one truth burned brighter than any fear: Alice was mine, and I would stop at nothing to reclaim the time stolen from us, to protect her from the shadows that had haunted her from the very beginning. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to fight for someone else, to love unconditionally, and to confront a world that had tried to erase me from my daughter's life. The web of lies stretched far and deep, but I would unravel it thread by thread. I would find the people who had hidden her, and I would bring the truth into the light. As I turned to glance at Alice sleeping peacefully, her small hand clutching the edge of the blanket, I realized something profound. The world had changed, irrevocably, and so had I. Luke, the solitary man content with his quiet life, was gone. In his place stood a father, a protector, and a man willing to face the darkest truths to ensure the safety and happiness of the little girl who had unknowingly waited 4 long years for him to arrive. And with that realization, I felt the first glimmer of hope pierce the shadows. Abe promised that no matter what lay ahead, we would face it together. The days that followed were a blur of research, phone calls, and late-night drives to track down the faintest traces of Alice's past. Every document I uncovered, every email I read, felt like peeling back a layer of a life I had never known I was a part of. And yet, the more I learned, the more terrifying it became. There were deliberate gaps, deliberate misdirections, and people who had spent years erasing my connection to Alice as though they had been preparing for a day like this. I kept replaying the phone call from the school in my head, her tiny voice asking for me. It was haunting, persistent, a call I could never unhear. The more I thought about it, the more I realized someone had wanted me to stay blind, to remain distant, to never claim what was mine. Alice adapted to my presence faster than I expected. Her small routines, breakfast with chocolate milk, tracing the same shapes in her coloring book, the way she meticulously lined up her stuffed animals, reminded me of a world I had never been part of, and yet in moments of quiet, when she looked at me with her wide, golden eyes, I could see flashes of fear, a deep-seated uncertainty, as if she had always known that something about her life wasn't right. I wanted to tell her everything, to give her answers, but the truth was so complicated, so tangled in lies and omissions, that I didn't even know where to begin. Determined to uncover the full story, I sought out Martin again, my father's old friend, who had a knack for digging into legal histories that were meant to stay hidden. He pored over the letters, emails, and documents I had collected. He leaned back, eyes narrowing as he scanned a particularly disturbing set of correspondence. Luke, this isn't just about hiding a child. Someone has gone to great lengths to cover up multiple actions: fraud, falsifying court documents, even coercion. Whoever orchestrated this wanted control. They wanted to manipulate your life and possibly Alice's, for reasons we may never fully understand. The words hit me harder than any punch: control, manipulation, the notion that someone had deliberately orchestrated a hidden life for my daughter, using every tool available to isolate us, gnawed at me. My anger rose with every new piece of evidence. I had spent years living alone, never imagining that someone had been quietly plotting to keep me from the most important part of my life. And yet, the more enraged I became, the more I realized that anger alone wouldn't protect Alice. I needed a plan, a strategy, a way to untangle the web that had ensnared both of us. Began contacting old colleagues from work, former neighbors, anyone who might have remembered the days when I had been involved in a fleeting relationship with Alice's mother. Every conversation, however brief, revealed fragments, tiny threads of memory I had buried in the fog of routine, alcohol and sleep-deprived nights. A photograph here, a name there, a fleeting mention of someone I had once known. Slowly, the outline of a woman, Alice's mother, emerged from the shadows. Her name was Claire, a woman I had loved in a way I hadn't realized until now. The memories hit me like lightning: her laughter, her warmth, the long walks we had taken along the river, the night that had ended in confusion and regret, leaving us both unaware that a child had been born as a result. The realization was almost too much to bear. 4 years had passed and no one had thought to tell me. No one had given me a chance to be a father, and now she was here, sitting in my apartment, trusting me with her life. I felt the weight of responsibility crush me, but alongside it was a strange, fierce joy, the kind I had never known. Alice was mine, and I would do everything to protect her, even if it meant facing the people who had orchestrated the greatest deception of my life. But the deeper I dug, the more dangerous it became. Emails hinted at threats, veiled warnings that someone had been monitoring Alice. Even from a distance, phone records showed suspicious activity, calls from numbers that disappeared before they could be traced. Someone had kept tabs on her, and now that I had claimed her, I had effectively announced my presence. Whoever had hidden her from me would not let her go. Quietly, the first confrontation came sooner than I expected. One evening, as I returned from work, the apartment door was slightly ajar. My heart stopped, a cold terror running through me. I pushed the door open slowly, signaling Alice to stay behind me, and stepped inside. The room was empty, but the sense of intrusion was palpable. Papers had been moved, small items shifted, subtle signs that someone had been here. Fear gripped me, but anger surged even stronger. This was no random burglary. It was a message. They knew I had found her. They knew I was trying to uncover the truth. I called Martin immediately. "Luke, you need to be careful. This is escalating. Whoever is behind this is watching, planning, and testing you. You need security, evidence, everything documented." His voice was calm but urgent, a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. I spent the night installing cameras, changing locks, and documenting every detail. Alice, sensing my agitation, crawled into my lap at one point, wrapping her tiny arms around me. "Daddy, are they coming back?" she whispered. My heart broke at the question. I hugged her tightly. "No one will touch you, Alice, I promise, no one. You're safe with me." Despite the precautions, the anxiety never fully lifted. Every knock at the door, every shadow outside the window, every unexpected call made my pulse race. And yet, amid the fear, a strange clarity emerged. I realized that I couldn't just react, I had to be proactive. I had to find the people who had hidden Alice, understand their motives, and confront them directly. Only then could we truly be safe. Weeks passed in a blur of investigation and preparation. Martin and I traced property records, old court filings, and email correspondences, slowly piecing together a network of people who had been involved in Alice's early life. Each discovery added layers of complexity and danger. The letters hinted at threats, bribes, and influence. The more I learned, the more I understood that Alice's life had been carefully manipulated by someone with power and resources, and now that I had reclaimed her, I had painted a target on our backs. One evening, I found a particularly disturbing email from an anonymous sender. It was blunt, cold, and chillingly precise. "You have found the child. Be careful. Some truths are not meant to be uncovered." My hands shook as I read the words. This was no longer about mistakes or bureaucracy. This was about someone who wanted control, who would go to any lengths to maintain it. Realized then that the fight ahead was not just legal or logistical, it was personal. Whoever had hidden Alice had underestimated me. They hadn't counted on the ferocity of a father discovering the daughter he never knew he had, and I wouldn't underestimate them. I began planning, documenting, and preparing. Every move I made was deliberate, calculated, as I gathered evidence and built a case that could not be ignored. Through it all, Alice remained my anchor. Her laughter, her curiosity, her trust in me, these were my guiding lights amid the darkness. Each day I taught her small things: how to tie her shoes, how to ride a bike, how to trust someone fully, and in return she taught me patience, vulnerability, and a love I had never known. I realized that in the midst of fear and danger there was also joy, small victories that reminded me why I was fighting so hard. But the more progress I made, the more the danger seemed to escalate. One night I returned home to find a note slipped under my door: "Stop digging or suffer the consequences." My stomach dropped. The threats were real, tangible, and escalating. Whoever had orchestrated this would not hesitate to act if I continued to uncover their secrets. And yet fear was no longer enough to stop me. My resolve hardened. Alice was here, and I would protect her at all costs. I began coordinating with Martin to plan our next steps. Legal avenues, protective measures, and strategic confrontations became our focus. We uncovered old guardianship papers, inconsistencies in the foster system, and hints of a larger scheme involving people I had never imagined could be connected to my life. Each discovery brought new pieces of the puzzle, but also new dangers. Alice, sensing the tension in my demeanor, asked one night, "Daddy, why are you always worried?" I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Because some people don't understand what it means to be good," I said softly. "But we're going to be okay. I promise you we'll face this together." Her small hand squeezed mine, a gesture of trust and love that steeled my resolve. The turning point came when we located a social worker who had been involved in Alice's early life. She was hesitant, fearful of repercussions, but eventually agreed to meet. Her testimony confirmed our worst suspicions. Someone had actively manipulated records, hidden Alice, and ensured that I remained unaware of her existence. The deception had been deliberate, calculated, and chillingly thorough. Armed with this new evidence, I realized the fight was far from over. The people who had orchestrated this would not surrender easily. But for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. The truth was within reach, and with it, the possibility of a life where Alice could finally be safe, loved, and truly mine. That night, as I watched Alice sleep peacefully, I felt a mixture of exhaustion, fear, and determination. The road ahead was fraught with danger, secrets, and confrontations I could not yet predict. But one thing was certain: I would not let anyone take her from me again. The world could be dark, cruel, and unpredictable, but in my arms Alice was safe. And in protecting her, I had discovered the depth of love, courage, and resilience I never knew I possessed. The day began like any other since. Alice had entered my life, but I knew better than to assume normalcy. 4 years of hidden truths, deliberate deception, and people who had spent time weaving a web around my daughter could not suddenly vanish. Even breakfast, with Alice carefully pouring her cereal while humming a tune I didn't recognize, carried a weight of fragile normality. I wanted to savor the simplicity, the innocence of the moment, but my mind refused to rest. Whoever had orchestrated this life for Alice had left traces everywhere, subtle enough to be almost invisible. yet deliberate enough to ensure I never noticed until it was too late. I began the day by revisiting the documents I had gathered over the past weeks. Social worker reports, court filings, email threads, photographs, each one a breadcrumb, leading back to a truth no one had wanted me to find. And then I found something that made my blood run cold. A series of letters, carefully hidden in a digital archive, written by someone claiming to know the real story. They were vague, ominous, and precise. Someone had been watching Alice from the very beginning, documenting her movements, her health, even my own life without my knowledge. The tone implied patience, calculation, and a determination to manipulate events from behind the shadows. As I read, a pattern emerged, one that led me back to Claire, Alice's mother. She had been young, vulnerable, and entangled with people who wielded influence and power in ways I hadn't understood at the time. Her untimely death, which had always been vaguely reported as an accident, now seemed suspicious. Details in the letters hinted at threats, coercion, and a deliberate effort to sever my connection with her. Someone had ensured that I remained oblivious to Alice's existence. My hand shook as I flipped through each document, the weight of 4 years of deception pressing down on me. I decided I had to see the social worker in person. She was one of the few who had survived the system, who had interacted with Alice during her earliest years, and might provide first-hand insight into the manipulations. I drove to a small office on the outskirts of town, one that had clearly been untouched for years. The building was shabby, paint peeling, and the air heavy with neglect. Inside, I found the woman, Anne, cautious but willing to speak once I explained the urgency. "You don't know what you're stepping into, Luke," she warned as we sat across from each other. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen more than she should have. Alice's early life. It wasn't normal. Her mother, Claire, got caught up with people who weren't supposed to have influence. They wanted her controlled, and when she became pregnant, it became their mission to ensure you never found out. I tried to fight it, I really did, but her voice faltered. Who did this to her? Who hid her from me? I asked, leaning forward. Desperate, Anne glanced around, as if the walls themselves could hear. There are people who operate in shadows, Luke. Powerful people who manipulate families, records, lives. I can't tell you everything, but you need to understand something. Alice was never meant to be found. Her existence threatened plans you couldn't even imagine. The words hit me harder than anything I had read in the letters. Someone had orchestrated my daughter's life like a game, and I was just discovering the rules. But fear wasn't enough to stop me. Anger surged, fierce and protective, and I realized I would go to any length to reclaim her, to expose the people who had tried to erase her. That night, Alice fell asleep clutching her stuffed rabbit, and I watched her, exhausted and tense. My mind raced with strategies, potential threats, and the steps I would have to take. Whoever had orchestrated this might have been careful, patient and dangerous, but they had underestimated one thing: the determination of a father who had just discovered the daughter he had been missing for 4 years. Over the next several days, I meticulously documented every lead, every thread of evidence, cross-referencing old emails, court filings, and Anne's recollections. Each revelation painted a darker picture of the people involved: lawyers, social workers, and unnamed figures who had exploited the system to hide Alice, to manipulate events, and to ensure that I never became part of her life. It was calculated cruelty, a network of deception designed to protect secrets that were never mine to hold, yet had shaped my life without my knowledge. Then came the breakthrough. A forgotten photograph tucked into an email thread revealed Claire holding a baby. Alice, while a man stood beside her, unknown to me, yet distinctly familiar. The letters hinted that he was part of the manipulation, someone who had exerted control over her life. Names, places, and dates aligned, revealing a pattern of influence that stretched far wider than I had anticipated. This wasn't just a small-scale deception. It was a carefully constructed operation. I realized I needed to confront the network head-on. I couldn't just rely on documents, whispers, or second-hand accounts. I had to find the people responsible, understand their motives, and reclaim Alice's life. But the deeper I went, the more I understood the danger. Threats escalated, anonymous messages, strange calls at odd hours, and subtle signs of surveillance. The people who had hidden Alice were still watching, still controlling from behind the shadows. One evening, as I returned home from tracking a lead, I found a note slipped under my door. The handwriting was precise, almost clinical. "Stop digging, or you will regret it." My stomach dropped. The warning was real. Someone knew exactly how far I had gotten and how close I was to uncovering the full truth. Fear surged, but it was tempered by a fierce resolve. I would not be intimidated. Not when Alice's life, her safety, and the truth were at stake. I contacted Martin, detailing every threat, every lead, every piece of evidence. His response was methodical, precise, and reassuring. "Luke, you're in uncharted territory. But we have the advantage, knowledge. They've relied on deception and isolation for years. You have proof, witnesses, and determination. We can dismantle this piece by piece." With Martin's guidance, I began organizing the evidence into a comprehensive file. Photographs, letters, emails, court documents, and Anne's testimony. Every piece reinforced the reality of the manipulation and revealed the lengths to which the people involved had gone to control Alice's life. But the files also raised new questions. What had Claire known before her death? Who were the people orchestrating this from the shadows? And most importantly, why had Alice been targeted for such extreme measures? Alice, sensing the tension, began asking more questions. "Daddy, why do they want to hurt us?" Her innocence struck me like a dagger. I knelt beside her, holding her hands, struggling to find words that wouldn't terrify her. "Some people make bad choices, Alice, but we are going to stay safe and I will protect you. I promise. No one will ever hurt you again." Her small hands clung to mine, and in that moment every fear, every doubt, every sleepless night crystallized into one undeniable truth. Nothing would stop me from ensuring her safety. Determined to confront the orchestrators, I began contacting former colleagues, distant relatives, and anyone who had interacted with Claire before her death. Slowly, a network emerged, names I hadn't heard in years, connections I hadn't realized existed, and a chain of influence that stretched further than I could have imagined. Each person provided fragments of the story, revealing a pattern of manipulation, control, and secrecy that had kept Alice hidden for 4 long years. One evening, I received a message from an unknown number, cryptic yet chilling. "You're getting too close. Step back or you'll regret it." My blood ran cold. They were watching, waiting, and aware of my every move. But fear was no longer a deterrent. I realized that to protect Alice and reclaim her life, I had to face them, confront the web of lies, and demand answers. With Martin's help, I devised a plan to gather everyone who had a hand in Alice's early life, social workers, lawyers, anyone who could verify the manipulation. I prepared questions, collected evidence, and rehearsed scenarios. I knew the confrontation could be dangerous, but the alternative, inaction, allowing the shadows to dictate Alice's life, was unacceptable. On the day of the meeting, I brought Alice with me. She clung to my hand, her trust and innocence giving me the courage I needed. As we entered the room, I felt a mixture of fear, anticipation, and resolve. This was it, the moment when years of secrecy, manipulation, and danger would finally face the light of truth. The confrontation was tense, filled with denials, half-truths, and veiled threats, but the evidence was overwhelming. Letters, documents, photographs, and testimonies left no room for escape. One by one, the orchestrators were forced to acknowledge their actions, revealing motives rooted in greed, power, and control. The depth of their manipulation was staggering, but the truth was finally laid bare. As the meeting ended, I held Alice close. The storm of deception that had haunted her life was beginning to dissipate. For the first time, I felt a sense of closure, a fragile but undeniable victory. We were still facing the challenges of rebuilding a life stolen from us, but the shadows no longer held power over us. That night, as Alice slept peacefully, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The fear, the anger, the relentless pursuit of truth, it had all led to this moment. We were together, safe and finally in control of our destiny, and while the road ahead would undoubtedly be filled with challenges, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never let anyone manipulate, threaten, or take Alice from me again. The days after the confrontation were heavy with a strange mixture of relief and unease. We had exposed some of the people who had manipulated Alice's life, but the web of secrets was far from fully unraveled. Every phone call, every email, Every small creak in the apartment reminded me that danger still lingered, and that the people who had tried to erase my daughter from my life were not the type to disappear quietly. Alice, meanwhile, seemed unaware of the tension that still hovered in the air, happily arranging her stuffed animals and humming tunes she had invented herself. Watching her, I felt the raw weight of responsibility. I was no longer just a man discovering his daughter. I was a protector, a guardian of a life that had been hidden and threatened for far too long. Decided to return to the documents and letters, reviewing every piece of evidence with a meticulous eye. There were threads I had initially dismissed as inconsequential, dates, phone numbers, vague references, but now they took on new significance. Some of the correspondences suggested that Claire had not died by accident, as I had been led to believe, but had been coerced, pressured, or even endangered by the same people who later hid Alice from me. The implications made my stomach churn. Whoever had controlled Claire had likely intended to manipulate both her and me, ensuring that the child would remain in the shadows. The thought filled me with rage, fear, and an unshakable determination. Determined to uncover the full truth, I reached out to a former colleague of Claire's, a woman named Lydia who had worked with her in social outreach programs. The call was tense. Lydia's voice trembled when she realized who I was, as if she had been waiting for this moment but feared the consequences of speaking out. "Luke, you have to understand," she said cautiously. "Claire tried to protect Alice from the beginning. She knew people were watching, people who had influence and weren't afraid to use it. She left clues, instructions, anything to ensure Alice's safety if something happened to her. Instructions, clues, my mind raced. I pressed her for details, and slowly, painstakingly, she revealed fragments of a plan Claire had set in motion before her death. Secret accounts, hidden documents, letters to trusted intermediaries, all designed to protect Alice and provide a trail that could eventually lead me to her. Claire had known that she might not survive, that I might not even know of Alice's existence, yet she had acted to give us a chance. The realization hit me with a mixture of awe and grief. She had fought for her daughter in ways I had never imagined, sacrificing her own safety to ensure that I would one day find her. Armed with this knowledge, I began to piece together the broader conspiracy. The orchestrators were not merely individuals seeking control. They were part of a network, exploiting vulnerable families, manipulating records, and using influence to cover their tracks. It became clear that uncovering Alice's past would require more than documentation. It would require strategy, patience, and vigilance. I began creating a timeline, connecting dates, names, and events, slowly revealing the full extent of the manipulation. Each discovery brought both clarity and a chilling reminder of the danger we still faced. Alice, blissfully unaware of the dangers around her, remained my anchor. Her laughter, her small hand clutching mine as we walked through the park, reminded me of why I had to press forward. She had been robbed of a normal childhood, left vulnerable to forces beyond her comprehension, and now it was my responsibility to shield her, guide her, and reclaim the years that had been stolen. I realized that fatherhood was no longer an abstract concept. It was an unrelenting, consuming reality that demanded courage I didn't know I possessed. The first major breakthrough came when I discovered a set of encrypted emails between the orchestrators. Hidden within the technical jargon were references to Alice's life, her education, and my lack of awareness. The emails confirmed what I had suspected. The manipulation had been intentional, premeditated, and sustained over years. Whoever had orchestrated this had anticipated every possible outcome, every potential obstacle, and yet they had failed to account for one variable: me. My determination to find Alice, to understand the truth, had bypassed their careful planning. I enlisted Martin's help once again. Together we decrypted the emails, tracked IP addresses, and cross-referenced everything with public records and Anne's testimony. Each piece of evidence not only revealed the network of manipulation but also provided actionable leads. We began mapping the people involved, their influence, and their connections, creating a blueprint that could be used to dismantle the system that had endangered Alice's life. The work was exhausting, meticulous, and fraught with risk, but with each new revelation, the path to justice became clearer. But danger was never far. One night, as I returned from tracking a particularly suspicious lead, I noticed subtle changes in the apartment. Items slightly moved, papers on my desk disturbed, the faintest scent of someone else's presence. My pulse quickened. The orchestrators were aware of my progress, and I realized that the closer I got to the truth, the more desperate they became. Fear surged, but it was tempered by resolve. I would not be intimidated. Alice's life, her safety, and her future depended on my courage. In response, I strengthened our defenses. Cameras, locks, and surveillance measures became routine, and Alice learned to be cautious without understanding the full gravity of the situation. We practiced safety protocols, discussing what to do in emergencies, and I began documenting everything meticulously, building a record that could not be ignored or destroyed. It was exhausting mentally and emotionally, but necessary. Each day, I reminded myself that this was temporary, that once the orchestrators were exposed, Alice could finally live a life free from fear and manipulation. Then came the revelation I hadn't anticipated. Hidden within a series of old letters from Claire were references to a man, someone who had been closely involved in orchestrating the deception, yet whose identity had remained concealed. The letters hinted at threats, coercion, and even bribery, revealing a figure who had manipulated not just records, but people, events, and circumstances to control Alice's life. The knowledge that a human agent, someone tangible, had been responsible for the years of deception filled me with both dread and determination. I knew I had to confront this person. The thought was terrifying, an individual with resources, influence, and a willingness to harm in order to maintain control. But fear could not deter me. I had Alice to protect, a daughter who had already suffered more than anyone should. I began gathering evidence, documenting the connections, and preparing for a confrontation that could finally bring the full truth into the light. In the weeks that followed, I traced this individual's network, connecting the dots between social workers, lawyers, and shadowy figures who had influenced Alice's early life. The process was grueling, each discovery raising new questions, each revelation exposing deeper layers of deception. But with Martin's guidance, I built a case that was not just comprehensive but irrefutable. The orchestrators had underestimated the persistence of a father discovering the child who had been hidden from him. Alice remained my constant. Each night as I watched her sleep, I marveled at her resilience, her trust, and her innocence. She had endured a life manipulated by forces beyond her understanding. Yet she remained curious, joyful, and loving. It strengthened my resolve. Whoever had orchestrated this would face the consequences. I would ensure that Alice's life, her safety, and her happiness were no longer controlled by shadows. The confrontation came at last. Armed with evidence, witnesses, and a clear understanding of the network, I faced the orchestrators in a neutral setting, with Martin and Anne present. The tension in the room was palpable, a mixture of fear, anger, and anticipation. One by one, the lies unraveled. Denials crumbled under the weight of documentation, emails, and testimony. Faces twisted with frustration, guilt, and desperation as the full extent of their actions became undeniable. It was a tense, exhausting ordeal. But by the end, the orchestrators had no choice but to acknowledge their manipulation, threats, and deliberate attempts to erase Alice from my life. As we left the meeting, Alice in my arms, I felt a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and triumph. The storm of deception that had defined her early life was finally dissipating. We were still facing the challenges of rebuilding trust, understanding, and a stolen childhood, but the shadows no longer held power over us. I realized that in the midst of fear and danger, there had been moments of clarity, courage, and love that defined what it meant to be a father. That night, as Alice slept peacefully, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The fear, the manipulation, the relentless pursuit of truth, it had all led to this moment. We were together, safe and finally in control of our destiny, and while the road ahead would undoubtedly continue to hold challenges, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never allow anyone to manipulate, threaten, or take Alice from me again. She was mine, and I would protect her with everything I had. The morning was unusually quiet, almost surreal, as I prepared for what I knew would be the final step in unraveling the years of deception. Alice, blissfully unaware of the storm that had defined her life before I found her, was humming softly as she colored in her book. I watched her, heart heavy with the realization of everything she had unknowingly endured. 4 years of life hidden from me, countless threats I hadn't fully anticipated, and the subtle manipulations that had shaped her early existence.
And yet here she was, resilient, innocent, and trusting.
I swore to myself in that moment that nothing, no one, would ever take her from me again. I had gathered everything: evidence, witnesses, documents, and the courage to confront the person who had orchestrated the entirety of this deception. Claire's letters had guided me, Anne had provided context, and Martin had offered the legal strategy and support necessary to face the orchestrators head-on. But the last piece was the most important: confronting the individual who had deliberately kept Alice from me, whose manipulations had created a shadow over our lives. The meeting was arranged in a neutral location, a nondescript office far from Alice's school and our apartment. I felt the weight of every moment leading up to this day, the sleepless nights, the relentless pursuit of truth, the anger, the fear, and above all, the love that had grown so fierce and protective over Alice. I held her hand for a brief moment before she went to a supervised area where she could play safely while I faced the final confrontation. Her small grip gave me strength. She was my anchor, my reason, and my responsibility. When the orchestrator entered the room, I felt a chill run through me. Calm, collected, with an air of control that had clearly been cultivated over years, this person had underestimated one thing: the relentless force of a father who had discovered the daughter that had been stolen from him. I laid out the evidence methodically: forged documents, altered records, emails, witness statements, and Claire's letters, all pointing to the deliberate manipulation that had kept Alice hidden. Every attempt at denial crumbled under the weight of proof. The orchestrator's face shifted from confident control to visible panic, realizing that the years of deception were collapsing in an instant. "You underestimated me," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "You thought you could erase my daughter's existence, hide her from me, and control her life from the shadows. You were wrong. She's mine, and I will protect her no matter what it takes." For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the rustle of papers and the faint hum of the air conditioner. The orchestrator's lips pressed into a thin line, eyes darting around, realizing the full consequences of being exposed. I didn't need threats, intimidation, or any displays of power. They had already lost. The truth had been unearthed, and with it, Alice's life could finally move out of the shadows. After the confrontation, we returned home. Alice ran into my arms, her laughter ringing through the apartment like sunlight breaking through clouds. I held her tightly, overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just transpired. For the first time, the danger felt distant, the threat removed. In the future, a life that had seemed stolen from us finally within reach. Every tear, every sleepless night, every pang of fear had led to this moment. Safety, trust, and the promise of a normal life, however fragile and tentative it might initially feel. In the days that followed, we began the slow process of reclaiming Alice's childhood. Her routines, her joys, and her sense of security became my primary focus. Simple things: a park visit, a favorite meal, bedtime stories, were treasures. Moments that had been denied to her for too long. And every evening as she drifted to sleep in my arms, I felt a profound gratitude for the life we had found together, for the second chance at fatherhood that had been stolen, hidden, and now finally returned. I also took time to understand Claire, the mother who had tried so valiantly to protect Alice despite her own vulnerabilities. Reading her letters, piecing together her struggles and sacrifices, I felt a deep sorrow and admiration. She had known the risks, had understood the dangers, and had acted with courage that few could comprehend. And while I mourned the loss of the woman I had loved, I honored her bravery by ensuring that Alice's life was no longer dictated by those who sought to control it. Months passed, and with each passing day, the shadows of the past grew weaker. The orchestrators had been exposed, their influence diminished, and Alice's life slowly became her own. I watched her grow with an awareness that each moment of trust, Laughter and discovery was a victory, not just for her, but for the bond we had fought to reclaim. And in her eyes, I saw the reflection of a life finally unburdened by manipulation, a life filled with love, protection, and the knowledge that she was never alone again. Looking back, I realized how drastically life had changed in the blink of an eye. From a solitary existence defined by routine and quiet solitude, I had been thrust into a reality filled with unimaginable revelations, danger and responsibility. And yet, through the fear, confusion, and chaos, I had discovered something far more profound: the capacity for love, courage, and resilience that I had never known. I was no longer the man who drank alone in a cramped apartment. I was a father, a protector, and a man willing to face any darkness for the child who had always been mine. One evening, as Alice drifted off to sleep, I sat on the couch, watching the neon lights from the bar across the street spill softly through the window. My thoughts were no longer filled with dread or uncertainty, but with hope, determination, and a deep, abiding love. The journey had been harrowing, filled with secrets, lies, and threats. Yet it had also revealed the extraordinary bond between a father and his daughter, a bond that could not be broken, manipulated, or stolen. And in that quiet moment, I promised myself and Alice that no matter what challenges might arise in the future, no matter what shadows might linger on the edges of our lives, we would face them together. She had been hidden, controlled, and threatened for too long, but now she was free. And I, Luke, her father, would never allow anyone to take that freedom, that safety, or that love from her again. As the city slept beyond our window, I held Alice close, her small hand wrapped around mine, and felt a peace I hadn't thought possible in years. The storm of secrets and danger had passed. The truth was finally ours, and together we would step into a life where every laugh, every moment of joy, and every ordinary day was a victory over the shadows that had tried to define us. We had found each other, and nothing, no secret, no threat, no manipulator could ever take that away.